Valhalla's Hall. 'Tis but thy name that is my enemy. Thou art thyself, though not a Montague. What's Montague? It is not nor hand, nor foot, nor arm, nor face, nor any other part belonging to a man. Oh, be thy some other name. What's in a name? That which is called a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. So Romeo would, were he not Romeo called, retain that dear perfection which he owes. Without that title, Romeo, doff thy name, and for that name, which is no part of thee, take all myself. William Shakespeare. And did those feet in ancient times walk upon England's mountains green, and was the holy Lamb of God on England's pleasant pastures seen? And did the countenance divine shine forth upon our cloudy hills? And was Jerusalem builded here among the dark satanic mills? Bring me my bow of burning gold, bring me my arrows of desire, bring me my spear, O clouds unfold, bring me my chariot of fire. I will not cease from mental fight, nor shall my sword sleep in my hand, till we have built Jerusalem in England's green and pleasant land. William Blake. This is my 12th video that started with an exploration into StarForts in July 2022, when I found myself in Berwick-upon-Tweed at the northern extremity of England. In video 11, I explored the concepts of designer landscapes and coastlines and gave some estimated timelines. Since publishing that video, I came across Jimmy Corsetti's Bright Insight channel, which gave me some of my missing evidence and tied up a number of loose ends, and I have created a new playlist of his highly detailed videos regarding the origins of Mediterranean Egyptians and their great catastrophe that caused the overnight demise of Atlantis. Before I look at Atlantis and its links to StarForts, I'm going to show you a number of images of designer landscapes from Grand Britannia or Albion. This was brought to the surface of my conscious by Darren Cole, one of my viewers, after a short video I did on designer coastlines, which in turn was after I had seen Paul Cook's video on how the White Cliffs of Dover were man-made. You see, in my mind, if you set out to build something, you must start with a blueprint, a plan, some grand design. And oh boy, did I find some grand design. Just a quick question. Does this look like a construction worker doing some survey work? I want to turn around and see a second giant setting up his theodolite to point and aim at this guy. Now, let's open Pandora's box with a key found in Glastonbury, as identified by Catherine Maltwood back in the 1930s, when she identified the Glastonbury Zodiac, hidden in plain sight, but seemingly forgotten for many centuries. I have overlaid a number of these pictures on different styles of maps and aerial photographs, so you can see that it's more than just wild speculation. So as I mentioned, all this was brought to my attention by Darren Cole, who viewed and commented on a video. He sent me some images of Graeme Griffith's book, Behold Jerusalem, and I subsequently purchased a copy of the book for myself. And if you want to see it, it's an amazing book. I would highly recommend you buy it. In the next series of images, I will show you Graeme's images that compare his findings with those of the Glastonbury Zodiac and the Preseli Zodiac, and that show how his Zodiac fits into Grand Britannia or Albion. I was going to start with Virgo, as seen in North Wales, but I've decided to follow the flow of Graeme's book, and the images will be very brief summary of Graeme's work, which was for me both a delight and overwhelming in equal measures. Graeme points out that some of the place names within these local zodiac landscapes and his colossal land sculptures are, well, let's say apt at least, but when you think about it, they show intelligence, or rather knowledge, of what they truly stood upon. These giants within our landscape were surely known about, and even laying of roads, field boundaries is deliberate. The intention is clear to define the divine. The number of names of landmarks, towns and rivers within the boundaries of these giant sculptures having appropriate names cannot simply be coincidental. By the time you finish watching this presentation, you will surely not be able to come to any other conclusion. We must remember, these landscapes would have been modelled most likely over 6,000 years ago, if not 12,000 years ago. So there's been many years of erosion, from both waves and storms on the coastline, as well as wind and rain to the interiors. And to be perfectly honest, I am extremely surprised, or rather astonished, that just how well they have stood up to the tests of the elements over time. It's certainly a credit to whomever fashioned these shores, and the phrase, "they don't build them like they used to," certainly seems very fitting here. Remember, all of these will have had a high degree of erosion. Looking at all these landscapes, it reminds me of the pride Slarty Barfast displays when he etches his portrait and his signature within the glacier ice of the Nordic fjords in Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And that idea now seems so far advanced in its thinking, even in today's enlightened world. If only the artist had signed and dated his work in the landscape, this would all be a lot easier. But remember the place names. The knowledge of the true form of our landscape was known and lost or withheld from us over time. But for those of us that have eyes to see and a mind to learn and reason, let the glory of this land be revealed in all its truly remarkable inception and creation. So the reason I initially referenced Jimmy's channel, Bright Insight, and put it up a new playlist of his Atlantis videos is because I felt I had been wrong-footed in my research for video 11, pointing to the sons of God as being descendants of Noah. Atlantis was the ancestral home of the ancient Mediterranean Egyptians that occupied the Nile Delta. It was these Egyptians' priests that told Solon, Plato's great-grandfather, of Atlantis and its 24-hour destruction that had happened around 9,000 years earlier. Plato was simply recording his great-grandfather's handwritten notes when he was told the world about Atlantis. So this amazing apparent capital city of an alleged worldwide empire has apparently revealed itself to us once more. Here in the Western Sahara Desert, we find the stripped bedrock that seems to be the most likely location of one of the most famous cities in the world. I was going to say the most famous, but as I started exploring the subject further, I was drawn down another line of investigation. But back to Atlantis. If we view the area on the topographic map, which I will link in the description so you can see for yourselves, we find that Atlantis, otherwise known as the Rikat or the Eye of the Sahara, is in fact the perfect match for the Eye of Ra. This should not be confused with the Eye of Horus, which has a totally different symbolism. Rather confusingly to us that use a Latin-based letter or script, the Eye of Horus looks like the capital letter R, whereas the Eye of Ra is the mirror image. Ra is the Egyptian equivalent of the Christian God or the Muslim Allah as the giver of light and creator of life and earth and heaven. The Egyptian creation story says that so pleased was Ra with his creation of earth that he shed a single tear of joy, and the water that sprung from his eye gave life to man. So if we say Atlantis is the physical representation of the Eye of Ra, then we might also say that the fountain of life could be found within, which would also support the out of Africa theory of man, although this theory may not be correct and possibly just another distraction. I do find it totally amazing that so many origin stories seem to have a startlingly similarities to each other. Even the myths and folklores of different areas of the world seem to have these similarities too. In terms of Atlantis, as retold by Jimmy on his Bright Insight channel, Atlantis was named after the eldest son of Poseidon, which could possibly be the male version of Britannia, or rather, Britannia could be the female version of Poseidon, or based on his image. The evidence for a biblical flood being the downfall of Atlantis might also be amazingly coincidental, or, as like most things, there would seem to be no such thing as a coincidence in this world. The flood that took out Atlantis appears to have come from the Mediterranean area, which happens to be where Noah landed, allegedly. Using the link to topographic-map.com that's in the description, you can explore the area of the Eye of the Sahara and see the evidence for yourselves. The topography scale should be locked as you open the link. Click the blue padlock to unlock it when you come to that time. If we zoom into another area and then unlock it and then relock it and pull back, we see different kinds of scars in the landscape. These appear to be more associated with water erosion from rain rather than a flood event. However, just a quick reminder that any water erosion in the desert would have to have taken place some 5,000 years ago or more, if we are to believe what we're told, and that the Sahara has been dry for 5,000 years. So I hope Jimmy is right, that with these tools now available to us, we're going to get a lot of remarkable exploration happening over the next few years. The topographic map system is really only suitable where we have large variations in height, although you can get some interesting insight into the edge of Dutch since North American Creighton using this system. In the UK, we can use the Scottish National Library system or the houseprices.io 3D LiDAR system, and we can see smaller variations, and you can see water erosion and ripples as would be associated with a flood event within the UK on that site. In video 11, I mentioned the 10 sons of God. These are depicted in reliefs and hieroglyphics in modern Mediterranean Egypt. And there were the ships that crossed the desert from the Red Sea to the Nile, being dragged across the desert. And these are depicted in the rock art in the area with the tall occupants. These 10 would appear to be associated with the gods of Sumer, but at this point it's not clear when they turned up in this region. Within the Bible, in the books of the Giants and the Book of the Watchers and the books of Enoch, which probably didn't quite make it into your version of the Bible, the Watchers are the 200 fallen angels that came to earth and split up into groups of 10. The angels refer to themselves as the sons of God, or the Watchers, and they take human wives. And these human wives produce sons who are known then as the Nephilim, or the giants. The angels start to impart heavenly knowledge and the secrets of the earth to man that should not yet have discovered them. This also ties back into the Greek story of Atlantis, as Poseidon has 5 sets of twins that he gives the control of his kingdom to, Atlantis being the oldest, and these are then the sons of God, children of God, of the god Poseidon. In the Egyptian story of Ra, he also has 10 children. In the biblical books, we're told that some of the Nephilim start to have dreams of an impending doom event for which they will be washed off the face of the earth, and they go to consult Enoch, who is Noah's great-grandfather. There are many other cultures around the world with similar deities, gods, or children of the gods that have a wealth of knowledge that help build the cities and their civilizations and teach the people the knowledge of the earth. Many ancient sites are references to the stars they have references in their design or their placement on the landscape, as if to build the heavens above on the earth below. Maybe the truth of the phrase above as below. It would certainly appear that these groups of sons of God would be the ideal candidates to be the designers of the large landscape and impart knowledge of how to build and harness the powers of the earth. Atlantis is simply a large-scale circular citadel. In the centre were the homes and the temples of the gods, with two wells, one of fresh, cold water and one of hot water, as in geothermal well. As I have been alluding to since my very first video, these wells, I believe, are at the heart of every starfort or citadel. It seems clear to me that the technology required to fashion the landscape and build the city of Atlantis is the exact same technology as required to build the landscapes of Albion or Grand Britannia and the starforts around the world. And with Atlantis being destroyed in one day and night, as told to Solon in about 450 BC, and it happened some 9,000 years prior to that, so approximately 11,500 years from prior to today, and the flood seems to be the one foreseen by the biblical Nephilim, and then seeking guidance from Noah's great-grandfather Enoch, probably around 500 years earlier than the flood itself, we can say that the technology existed for these constructions at least 12,000 years ago, and that's not even taking into account how long the Watchers or the Nephilim had been around prior to the date of their having the dreams. Although we might assume that the Watchers had been around since Adam, which by biblical timelines was probably 1,000 years prior to that, assuming we can trust the Bible with regards to human lifelines. But either way, we're saying about 13,000 years of the knowledge being available on the basis of the Bible. So back to the zodiac landscapes. It is clear that even the smallest zodiac symbols of Glastonbury or Bodmin or Purcell are not visible from the ground. And so the natural question arising is, how high would you have to be to view them fully? And then how high would you have to be to see Virgo in North Wales or any of the other 100-mile plus tall giants of Albion? The answer to that question is not at all obvious, nor is the reason for their construction, but my conclusion for their existence is potentially found in our own language. Once again, I found myself on uncomfortable ground being dyslexic, which is a condition that I describe as a fear of the written word. And as with many fears, which are often irrational or illogical, or simply a fear of the unknown or misunderstanding of the subject, my fear is unreasonable, especially as I actually like to play with words. So maybe I'm not so much in fear, but instead I have a healthy respect for, especially as I would rather write than speak out aloud in front of an audience. So this channel is almost therapeutic for my condition, as first I write the script, then force myself to record my own voice before I collate the images for the video. And you may have noticed my nerves and hesitation, especially in my earlier videos. One man's pleasure is another man's torment. I would hope that all of you that are watching, reading, or listening to my presentations are hungry for knowledge and truth about the realm we live in and share together. We all have equal rights to a claim of its ownership and its history. After all, we have a common right to its past and an equal right to its future. The so-called gatekeepers or controllers of man and knowledge have no more right than a newborn baby to say who or how we should live in this world or utilize our surroundings. We all have the birthright to an equal share of the resources of this world for the good of all life that fills it. Mankind is not an infestation, but our knowledge and ability should be used to act as responsible guardians of this most sacred cradle or ark of life. But this is no justification to sacrifice our existence, just a call to be more harmonious with our surroundings. And I do not believe the false science we have been presented over the past few years. Science should respect contrary opinion and consider opposing views, not censor. And not just tell us to blindly trust it without providing us with proof or evidence of its own facts. I recently booked a flight from England to Cyprus, a flight that we are told by the airline is more fuel efficient than driving a saloon car for even a tenth of the distance, even at its most efficient speed. And they use the latest fuel efficient jet engines that use far less fuel than they once did. And there are plenty of videos on YouTube explaining just how little fuel they actually use. But we're told that we must reduce our carbon footprint by 80%. Here in England, the total population produces less than 2% of the total carbon footprint of the world. So even if we achieved the impossible goal of net zero within England, we can only achieve a maximum of 2% reduction of the world's total footprint. Even if we all got struck down by some mysterious plague tomorrow and all keeled over in the streets before midnight, we would not make a jot of difference to the carbon output. Can you have a carbon output in a sealed system? I don't know. We don't add anything in, we don't take anything out through the seal, into space. So where's this carbon coming from? It's coming from the Earth itself, and the Earth will reclaim it, and it's all a load of twaddle. So anyway, I reached the final payment screen of my flight transaction. I was offered the ability to offset the carbon of my flight. I had three options. One, the full offset of the cost for £11 extra. Two, a partial offset with a payment of an additional £3, or no offset for zero cost. No doubt this last option would reduce my social credit score in their new digital currency system. So the last option's the one I picked. Like the 5p bag tax to save a turtle, as mentioned in the Karl Pilkington video, which I will put a link in the description again, especially as it's so funny and true. If we are given the option to be righteous by paying an extra tax, we're more likely to do that than to actually change our habits. But again, I question the logic of these things. If we can pay to offset our carbon, why is everyone worried about it? Let's just pay up and automatically offset the carbon with taxes. If it was that easy, then only the rich would travel mostly to Davos in private jets with clean-blooded pilots, whilst the poor should stay at home in lockstep. No, wait, hang on, I said that wrong. What I meant to say was, why don't we just do the offset thing and plant a tree before we go off to work each morning? No, hang on. That's wrong too. The world is, as it has for millennia, currently working to keep our climate and atmosphere in balance, despite our best efforts to get it out of balance. So what we actually need to do is stand up and be counted. The government work for us. So why are they so rich and we're so poor? We currently have a Prime Minister in the UK that is richer than the royal family, and that's not easy, as the royals own 90% of the world's landmass, allegedly. Anyway, this political elite that feel they have the right to tell us how to live in a world that doesn't belong to them are the same people that seek to withhold knowledge and divide our opinions in hopes that whilst we're so busy distracted fighting each other, they can manipulate the situation and everything else and keep us enslaved in their feudal system. War and hatred against others serves no man or beast, and those that promote such ideologies are not acting for the selfless good of humanity or the planet, but are in fact acting selfishly in perverse manner of control, whilst encouraging and enforcing their unlawful system of indebtedness towards themselves and their fiat currency system. If this world is a temple to life, then we should seek to throw out the money changers or educate them by example with the true nature of life, harmony and coexistence in this world, whilst rejecting an indebted-based economy at the cost of ecology. So, back to the question of how high and why. So the words I was thinking of are spiritual home. We often refer to somewhere as a spiritual home, a place that we might have no historical attachment to, but somewhere we might find an emotional or spiritual attachment to. So maybe the creators of the Zodiac landscapes were creating a home for their spirits, or where their soul might find peace with an attachment to both the physical realm around them and the heavens above. But I feel that these physical symbols are not meant to be viewed by our physical bodies as such, but are and should be viewed by our emotional and spiritual consciousness. They should be viewed by our mind's eye. Indeed, whilst looking for these zodiacs within the landscape, I personally found it extremely difficult to visualize them without the guidance of the maps set out before me. So no matter how high I might have tried to view them from, it would seem that without being in touch with my spiritual or the non-tangible element of my existence, I might fail to see the glory of what was laid out before me. You could almost liken this to faith or religion, which should not be confused with their churches and temples. I guess, whilst not being totally in tune with my spiritual side, I could and would have viewed the landscape as a random form of nature. Only when I see the face of Virgo in Anglesey, watching and either tossing or grasping at the germinating seed, Bardsey Island, with her outstretched arm of the Limb Peninsula, can I truly appreciate the world around me seems to be built from the lowest depths of the oceans to the highest peaks to satisfy my physical existence, but I would not be able to appreciate this spiritual vision without a map in front of me, although Virgo's appearance on the map of the coastline needs less highlighting for me than the Glastonbury, Bodmin or Pacelli zodiacs. But thinking about the heavenly zodiac and the vision that appears every night above our heads, if we didn't have a map to initially guide us, would we see the random series of twinkling fires in the night sky as deities? So I guess what I'm alluding to is that without a little faith and guidance, we might all be blind to the glory of our surroundings. So how high do we need to be to visualize our surroundings? Well, it seems we don't need to be higher than ground level, as maps can be drawn from observations at ground level. However, we may need guidance and the ability to grasp the intangible to fully appreciate its beauty and form. As with Glastonbury, Bodmin had an abbey, and there were at least one, if not several, around the Preseli Hills area. And I'm sure there are many of you that don't believe abbeys were religious, and they have been hijacked by the political elite to enforce religious control on those that sought to reject their political control. Interestingly, the stone around Preseli has been identified as the stone used at Stonehenge, if you believe Stonehenge is made from quarried stone rather than geopolymer, but maybe that's another story. Now, just a quick word on the difference between abbeys and priories. Basically, there is no difference. They would have us believe that they are both monasteries occupied by monks or nuns. The difference lies in the title of the leader or their association with a different religious denomination. So we find an abbot or an abbess is in charge of an abbey, and a prior or a prioress is in charge of a priory. It might also be that priories were built prior to a castle or citadel or StarFort. An abbey or a priory within a city may also become a minster or a cathedral. They are often found in the centre of citadels or StarForts and probably had a geothermal well below their bell tower or spire. An abbey or a priory without a city would often control large sections of land around them and run farm estates, so perfectly placed to do a spot of large-scale landscaping too. So let's just think for a moment about everything I've just presented here, and I ask you to consider just how much planning, forethought, materials, labour and time would it take to produce a single cubic metre of calcium carbonate or chalk? How much time and effort might you need to simply source that material without Amazon online or a builder's merchant? How many oyster shells would you need to grind down? Then let's consider the Isle of Wight. How long might it take you, and how easy could you find 380 million cubic metres of chalk, which is basically the 380 square kilometres at a depth of just 1 metre, which is effectively what the Isle of Wight is, although technically, is it 50 metres depth? I don't know. I'm not a geologist. I haven't checked it out. But then it's simply just got a layer of mud on the top from a mud event, which we'll cover in a later video again. How about then filling another 170,000 square kilometres, all sorted and sifted into various colours, stone, then arranged to produce this zodiac collage in glorious technicolor. So that's now 170,000 million cubic meters, or for those of you who use the American counting system, 170 billion cubic meters of geopolymer, or whatever you want to call whatever it is. This is what you would need to cover England, Wales and Northern Ireland, just to a depth of 1 metre. And I think there's a lot more depth to it than that. So Graeme's conclusion within his Behold Jerusalem book appears to be even far more far-fetched than my own conclusion, in that some force far more divine has designed this landscape and perfectly moulded the coastline with wind and rain and storm, whilst guiding the flow of the rivers and influencing man in the placement of roads and canals, field boundaries and place names. But Graeme's book was published 20 years ago to a far less accepting audience than he might have found today. Surely his theory requires that all living and inanimate objects has the same biological and inorganic programming. Every grain of salt and sand, every drop of blood and water, even every flake of chalk and cheese, has a divine purpose to mould itself into the landscape of the entire country, if not the entire world, into the forms that we see today. Douglas Adam might have agreed with Graeme, as although he starts with the world with a grand design, he then says that everything within that world has its own inbuilt program to follow, which is basically hardwired memory. However, as any parent will know, although we have a small base program, our DNA, that hardwires many of our physical attributes and causes us to take that grasp of first breath as we are unlawfully docked into their enslavement system after passing through the birth canal, our spiritual and personal attributes are gained from our environment that nourishes us. Back to the landscape. Whichever theory is ultimately proven or accepted to be the closest to the truth, the fact that the landscape itself has influenced so many literary works becomes more apparent as we study these works of art within Britain's or Albion's landscape. The only reason the Glastonbury Zodiac was identified by Catherine Maltwood was because she felt that the manuscript of a story of the quest of the Holy Grail that she was illustrating seemed to be describing the local landscape. Indeed, all the tales of the quest for the Holy Grail all seem to be played out within, if not a local zodiac landscape like Glastonbury, then a wider zodiac landscape of Albion. Even the Greek and the Sumerian myths and the books, whether included or not included in the Bible, from Noah to the crucifixion, all seem to be written or devised from this green and pleasant land. Graeme even points to Jonah's fishy tale and how it may not have taken place at sea, but on dry land, may be the same trail that was allegedly walked by Jesus himself in local folklore, is to be believed, following the ley line from Land's End to Glastonbury. Graeme's book draws upon far more than I have mentioned here, but basically, no matter what language or area of the world you explore, their local folklore and possibly religious texts all seem to be played out in the English landscape. So what can all this possibly mean? Well, my other book for Christmas was the Book of Enoch, or the Book of the Giants and the Watchers, or the Nephilim. And what these manuscripts show us is that they have been rewritten to draw upon the local mythology and even topography. So although we presume a true and literally translation of these most important books, we find that we have similar books, but names and places seem to be swapped or changed to suit the local audience. So now we have a small problem, or rather an extremely large problem. And I honestly can't see a way to resolve it right now. But basically, those that have been in control of us, of our recorded history, and even our religious texts, have over the course of time rewritten it so many times it barely resembles the truth. But it is so entwined and blended with myth, folklore, and facts that it's almost impossible to decipher which bits are fact or fiction, which is worrying if we are told our religious books are the truth of our God. But it becomes hard to say which came first. Was it the trip from the White Dove Isle landing in Dover, or was it Noah's dove landing after the flood? Was it the giant lamb holding up a cross where we find Jesus with his fatal wound at High Cup Nick, or was it a spear nicking his body and his uncle catching his blood within a cup held high? And is Jerusalem the original name of the City of London? Is the Eye of the Needle really referring to Bishopsgate and Threadneedle Street? Is its temple St. Paul's Cathedral? And what of the black and the white friars? Are these the Templars? Is that simply the name for those that reside in the area known as Temple? Maybe if we consider the giants, Nephilims, or the Watchers of the Bible, or the Titans from Greek mythology, or countless other stories from other civilizations and cultures, were all the same base story, or recollections of a distant past embellished in its verbal retelling, we might say that some truth remains within these myths. Or maybe the designers and builders did have foresight of the future and left their predictions within their writings and their landscape for a time when the truth could be deciphered in time to stop a dark evil force from overcoming the true good light. The writing and research of Comyns Beaumont also suggests that the content of the Bible all happened within the British Isles, as did much of the Greek mythology, and he suggests that the cradle of life was in fact centred around Scotland and Norway in an area destroyed by a comet, which in turn possibly caused a biblical flood. The Bible was, he believes, then transposed to the Middle East by recreating landmarks and places and changing names and some other details. This also seems plausible after all I have discovered since my last video. But this would mean that the fight for the Holy Land is being fought in the wrong country and against the wrong people. There are only a few things I can say for certain. The past has been rewritten more than once. There was a flood that caught many people off guard and killed a lot. We are all slaves to a system that is designed to keep us enslaved. No transgression can be forgiven if it is premeditated. Nobody died on a cross for my sins. The only person responsible for a sin is the sinner himself. We are heading for an amazing journey of enlightenment, and the knowledge will ultimately set us free. But there will be a high price to pay by many, some deservedly, but many not so deservedly. Unfortunately, the road ahead will be long and protracted. If Hollywood reveals truths, then what we need right now is a hero to start up that vast machine in a hidden pyramid in, say, Antarctica, or maybe it's under the Pennines. And that machine will miraculously restore the atmosphere, neutralizing all the climate change science whilst transmitting vast quantities of free energy around the world. And finally, why did I settle on this particular name for my video? And why the quotations at the start? I guess the quote from Romeo and Juliet summed up the literary edits of history. By changing names and locations, the truth remains whilst making the content palatable to the consumer. I guess I felt it poignant. And the Tudor rose looks like a StarFort, which gave me a good visual reference to provide for the reading. And did those feet in ancient times, or it might be known as Jerusalem to you, well, I hope that became clear. If not, go back and watch again, or share this video with a friend and let them explain it to you. And so, to the title. Valhalla invokes heavenly references, at least in Viking terms, which some of you may be questioning their existence. Yet, what were we told about the Vikings? We're told they originated from the Scandinavian area. They had seagoing dragon ships with sails and oars. There are even stories that lurk in the depths of my memory of a raven returning to the ship with a branch to indicate that there was land ahead. This calls to mind now the story of Noah and the flood, and the rock art in the deserts to the west of the Nile shows something resembling a dragon ship with sails and oars, surprisingly, whilst the occupants wear ostrich plumes on their head, which could be mistaken for two-horned headgear from a distance, and maybe like fallen angels or watchers, we are told they took the women. Yet we're also told they had farming skills, fantastic farming skills, and were heavy drinkers, which might bring us back to Virgo, being the goddess of the harvest and the beer and the bread and everything else, and the facility. But I also mentioned Comis Beaumont, who felt that the Scandinavians might be the fathers of civilization. So why Hall as opposed to Hall? H-A-U-L as opposed to H-A-L-L. Well, as I said, I do like to play with words, and with all these seemingly misspelt place names in Behold Jerusalem, and everyone seemingly talking about the spoken word being key rather than its written meaning, Valhalla is said to be a vast room or a hall, H-A-L-L, with 540 doors through which 800 warriors could pass abreast at one go. So 540 times 800 in an instant through the door, thus allowing virtual instantaneous response to assist Odin at the time of Ragnarok. Or should we translate that to Armageddon? Who knows? So why use Hall, H-A-U-L? Well, I refer to the definition as usually large amount of something that has been stolen or is illegal. So again, seemed rather apt. So we know we have this large amount of stolen knowledge from us, and this knowledge allows us to find heaven on earth. So Valhalla's Hall seemed most appropriate. I was going to end the video here, but as I was compiling the images for this video, I suddenly became aware that the few landscape zodiacs that I knew of were not the only ones. Apparently, the small ones, and when I say small, I mean less than 20 miles or 32 kilometre diameters, seem to be located all over the world. I am now aware of at least 10 in England, from Lizard Point over to Brighton and Hove, several in Wales, and stretching into the north of England. But I'm sure there are far more than that I am not aware of. Let me know in the comments if you know of any. If we look to the earliest visual representations from Egypt and Sumeria, we not only find that Capricorn is half goat, half fish, as in the Great Albion Zodiac, and the stars only show a single horn. It is also said that the unicorn was left to swim behind the ark in the flood. In the Glastonbury, Lizard Point and Kingston upon Thames zodiacs, there is a large hound that appears to defend the central zodiac, and this appears to be in the position of the constellation of Canis Major, or Great Dog. Which brings us full circle to what I initially thought was a bit of a joke, but it appears that some people believe that Australia is that protector of an even bigger worldwide zodiac. But I certainly need to dig a little more into that one, although I am going to leave a link to the following topographic map in the description. It appears that Taurus in America was not just limited to the Ford Motor Company. This is the Bighorn National Forest in Wyoming, about 20 miles southwest of Sheridan, which some have suggested is the aptly named area that is the horn of a zodiac, Taurus. So if we pull out and follow our noses south by southeast to now include Colorado Springs, some 475 miles or 760 kilometers away, we find ourselves nose to nose with, well, I wanted to say Taurus, but it looks more like a buffalo, with a bullseye centered in the Arapahoe National Wildlife Refuge, 155 miles or 250 kilometers northwest of Colorado Springs. Surrounding the would-be bullseye are a circle of peaks, including Sentinel Mountain, just inside the north of the ring. A sentinel being a lookout, so we might say the mountain is looking heavenly out of the eye, or it could even be the twinkle in the eye. And then, and I swear this is all a surprise to me, and I am simply recounting the exactly as I discovered it less than an hour ago of writing this script. To the south, we find Buffalo Creek, Buffalo Ridge, and Buffalo Peak staring us straight in the eyes, and thus we find the names toy with us as if to give us a nod and a wry smile to indicate that we are not the first to notice the landscape under our feet, whilst the unwitting or unwilling observer simply moves on without acknowledgement to the majesty of their surroundings, simply pointing to a randomly placed circular set of hills that in themselves, I'm sure, are beautiful in their majestic landscape. But the appreciation of the splendour feels far more satisfying when you too adorn that wry smile and nod to your fellow traveller along life's footpath of discovery. So, without further delay, I will finalise this presentation to share these images and thoughts with you, and give you that nod with the widest of grins on my face, and ask you to pass on that nod to those that share our path, or those that you feel should join us here. And just one last point or line to draw your attention to, and that is the I-70 highway. On Google Maps, I'm displaying here with terrain details switched on, and we find it follows the landscape of mountain valleys that flow into the Colorado River and head virtually directly westward from Denver to Grand Junction, some 180 miles or 288 kilometers, as if to tie a rope across the snout of the buffalo, showing us that not only have they tamed the landscape, but the buffalo that may have grazed there too. So please like and subscribe and share this video far and wide, if only to put a smile on their faces, or to see if they too return that knowing nod and wry smile back at you. And if you know of any other zodiacs in the landscape, let me know, and I will share them in the near future, as I feel I will be looking more into this subject. But just before I go, I just have one more thing. I identified another star fort, or rather, I found one map online, and I'm going to place it in the landscape. You may be aware of Neuf-Brisach on the French side of the Rhine Valley, but just 24 kilometers to the east, we find Freiburg im Breisgau on the German side of the River Rhine. The main body of the star fort seems to have been totally absorbed into the city now, but there are still walls outside the city and going up into the hills to the east. So I have got more material. I've got some images and videos from Cyprus, which I will now sort of upload separately in a new video once I get that done. And we now have the Star Cruiser to go and explore the Zodiac of Albion, i.e. we're going to go around the English landscape, and I'm going to get the drone out and we're going to visit some star forts and some other interesting sites and try and follow the path and find the large Albion Zodiac at the start of this video. I hope you've liked all this video, and I hope you enjoy my future productions as well. And don't forget, I'm making these videos to change the way you think, because almost everything you have been taught was designed to program you to stop thinking critically and accept everything you are told as truth without question. And there you go. Please like, subscribe, and share my videos. Thanks.